I primarily worked as a post-bac student, so I have already finished undergrad, and I was working with the Baliga Lab as a part of a program that was known as the Systems Research Scholars Program. And I worked with the Baliga Lab on their ongoing projects, but was also allowed to pursue my own research interests and begin my own project on my own. And I carried out these projects through like collaborations within the lab and between other labs at ISB, which is like a huge aspect of ISB in general, which is this big collaboration between everybody. Um, and so I think that was a really big part of my experience was just meeting a whole bunch of people from different backgrounds and from different aspects of research. My project was actually interdisciplinary in nature, and so that really gave me the opportunity to utilize those collaborations to get exposure to different fields that I had never seen before. I do have a background in both mathematics and biology, so this felt like a perfect marriage of the things that I was interested in at the time. And through this experience, I think I learned how to independently ask deep, probing research questions, and also learned, what collaborations could and should look like to best fill in like knowledge gaps for like new research areas and how to like get the most out of the research that you're doing. And also, I was also able to gain some experience at ISB with presentations. And that was to various audiences. Not everybody at ISB works on the same thing or has knowledge on the same research. And so this helped me really hone in on my presentation skills to not only like a highly intelligent and scientific audience, but to audiences that didn't really know what I was talking about. And Nitin and the rest of the lab actually helped to encourage these experiences by having me present at conferences as well as, institute wide with different groups of people. So in general, like my experience at ISB was like a pretty unique one. Not many bachelor students are able to perform such independent research on their own, which I am like very grateful for. And I think it really helped propel me for the rest of my career. And ISB just really in general gave me the opportunity to learn, grow, and have these experiences that I think probably were some of the best I've had in science so far. So in my time at ISB, the projects that I worked on generally, again, were with the Baliga Lab, and I worked on finding new ways to tackle antibiotic resistance, specifically with regards to tuberculosis. And so, the main issue that we have is that we just keep generating more and more antibiotics to help alleviate the issue of tuberculosis and try and make treatment actually work for the disease. But unfortunately, we just see that the more antibiotics we get, the more antibiotics actually are no longer working against TB because antibiotic resistance develops. And so rather than creating a new drug, I worked instead with the lab to optimize and understand the mechanics behind how resistance develops. In this, I like performed something that's known as selective evolution, where basically we selected for the environments which would allow resistance to develop using lower concentrations of drugs until the bacteria actually develop this condition where they have resistance to whatever drug I was working with in the experiments. And this was done in a cyclic manner. So like we could have a giant timeline of basically what was happening as resistance developed in the bacteria. This is really cool because like unlike other systems, you don't really get the opportunity to look at evolution on such a short time scale, but in bacteria, you do get the opportunity to do so. And so through this evolution, I could actually go back and look at different stages in the process of me selecting for antibiotic resistance and see if there were any changes which were like indicative of resistance developing or different from like the normal cultures or the normal fully susceptible bacteria. And from there, we could then try and understand like what processes the bacteria are going through, as well as like what changes they were making and what sort of decisions that they were making as they developed this characteristic. And so, in trying to understand these stepwise changes, it gives us a better opportunity to see the resolution of how the resistance happens in the first place. And then once we understand that at like a very small resolution, we can actually move forward and say, like, we can pinpoint this one aspect of this process to target to completely prevent resistance in the first place. And then that would eliminate the need for us to make new drugs anyway. I think the aspect of ISB that made my experience quite enjoyable was definitely the people and collaborations that I experienced. I'm a pretty passionate person about research. And so, working on a project and working on research is always like an enjoyable situation, an enjoyable challenge, even though some aspects of the actual project can be pretty frustrating. Um, but, when you do hit those frustrating patches, it does become kind of hard to find the motivation to like keep going. And so when you have situations like your results don't pan out, it's really the people who you're working with as well as the relationships that you have that keep the project going that particularly take the most value, I think. um Everybody at ISB was always great and always willing to work with me, even though like I came from a very different background than a lot of people, and especially as someone who didn't go to graduate school yet, and didn't have as much experience as say a grad student or a postdoc or even a science or senior research scientist. Um, and everyone was always willing to help me in whatever capacity I needed. And so like that included helping me come up with new ideas, troubleshooting an assay that I was running, helping me figure out how to design an experiment, or even just giving me encouragement when frustrated. There were a couple moments during my experience when my experiments weren't working, and I working with a postdoc in the lab. He always had encouraged me to keep going, and that it only takes one experiment to go right for you to get results that are meaningful. And so I never really felt like I had to go it alone while I was at ISB. um, Also, I just really liked collaboration for the sheer enjoyment of hearing other people's perspectives on research. I think this is where the interdisciplinary nature of ISB comes in like great. I guess it comes in handy greatly. And that's just because like as someone who has a math training background but has worked in biology, the way I think is a lot different than just a pure biologist or even like a computational biologist or someone who worked in physics. And it was just really refreshing to hear like how people thought about my ideas from a different perspective and the thoughts that they had in terms of new directions I could go in or different directions I could go in to make things easier for myself, or even something that might be more interesting to me, would come up in conversation that I would have never thought out of on my own. And so, I think that really played into the great creativity that ISB had. And I just always really enjoyed working with most people at the institute in general because of that. I think my lab in general made for a really enjoyable experience. I did spend a lot of time in lab performing experiments, and I think having camaraderie with some of the folks who were in the wet lab was really nice. Everybody was always friendly and kind, as I had talked about previously. In particular, the research associates who were always in lab and honestly like really worked their butts off always made me feel like I was a part of a family when I was in lab. There's some sort of like it's camaraderie, like I said before, but it's also like commisery in terms of like how hard you're working on your experiments, and when things don't go right, like there are people that can relate to you and understand what you're going through. Um, and these people also always just asked me how my research was going, but also like asked me how I was doing and how my career was panning out, and felt like they had a deep, um, I guess, respect for what I was doing, as well as like a desire to get to know me as a person rather than just as someone who was working in lab. And I had so much fun spending time with these people, um, especially when I would be in at like the very early morning hours or at late evening hours. And it made time fly by. So I think I owe a lot to the people in the Beliga lab who were constantly in lab, for helping me get through some of the toughest moments of my project over the 2 years that I was there. And so, like, some of those people would include like Renee, Marianne, Min, Deep, Wilson, and also Vivek, who was the postdoc that I worked directly with. So after my time at ISB, I actually ended up getting into grad school. I applied for a lot of programs that were similar in terms of doing systems biology research. And so currently I am a second year grad student at Harvard, getting my PhD as a part of the systems synthetic and quantitative biology program. I'm also now heading the department's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, I'm kind of like their fellow. So I will be teaching orientation as well as teaching a course on diversity, equity, and inclusion in science in the spring. I'm also on the DEI committee as well, and I'm working on ways in which we can talk more about diversity in science at Harvard as well as just individually in my program. I think ISB really helped me to get to where I am now by showing me what's possible with a diverse background like mine. As much as I love doing wet lab biology research, in undergrad, I had a huge passion for mathematics, and that's what my bachelor's degree is in. So obviously, I really enjoyed it. Um, and the approaches and logic involved in like mathematical and computational work seem to complement the biological work that I enjoy so well. But after undergrad, I didn't really know how to combine my passions until I came to ISB. That was the main reason that I even came to ISB. And I think that the the work that I did with the Baliga Lab really helped me to solidify the understanding of what I could do with the background that I had. I got to experience the type of work that I had always dreamed of in a way that probably wouldn't have been open to me any other place. A lot of places, like for post-bac programs, didn't really offer the opportunity to do both wet and dry lab research. And rather, like that's something that like a late stage grad student would do or something that a postdoc would do. Um, and I was a little bit limited in the work that I had done in my undergraduate institution because it was small. And so I think that ISB and their collaborative atmosphere, as well as their just really, really, I would say their really intense research atmosphere. Like it's not intense in a bad way, but like in a good way. Like everybody's really invested in their research and everybody's really dedicated to the work that they do. And I think that in the way that they think deeply about approaches to their research questions, um, I using that as a technique and like as a motivation to like do research, I learned how to use systems thinking to really get at difficult problems. And this is a type of thinking that I think is really important in grad school, and I think has now set me up to be successful in grad school because I've experienced that before. Um, and obviously I enjoyed working in sysbio and like the questions behind sysbio a lot because I'm now in a sysbio program. But I think that the exposure to this type of thinking and this type of environment probably has led me to be more involved in the things that I am passionate about, but also prepare me to be a part of graduate school. Um, I think a little bit better than my peers who just came out of undergrad and haven't had the experience of having to think on that deep level. I would say that they should challenge themselves and lean into the unknown and uncomfortable situations. You don't really learn from sticking inside your comfort zone, and you can never really progress. I feel like if you don't push yourself in some aspect of your research or even in life. And I think ISB not only helped me do that, but it helps everybody do that. They kind of throw you into fields of study where it's nearly impossible for any one person to be like an absolute expert on every aspect of the research field, just because it is so interdisciplinary and there are so many aspects to all the research. Um, and so, when you come into this type of research, you're being challenged to kind of think outside the box and outside the skills that you already have to continue to ask questions that further your understanding on whatever question you're interested in. And sometimes it feels a little bit scary, and it makes you kind of wonder whether or not you're actually good at what you do, just because, it is hard not recognizing that. you don't know everything, and it's kind of impossible for you to know everything. But, coming out on the other side of the work, that struggle and that scariness is ultimately what I found to be necessary for like my own personal growth. And I think this is probably going to be true for most people. So for a lot of people that are afraid to take the leap and are, thinking about working at ISB in any capacity, I would say that, be prepared to come in and be given a challenge. And if you're looking for that challenge, that's great. This is the place. This is the place to be. This is the place to be pushed. You just have to rise to the occasion and kind of motivate yourself to work outside what you know, and really just work hard to try and, I guess, learn and become a better scientist through the whole process. I think that ISB differs from most academic or research settings in definitely their collaboration. I think, and I've said this a lot, but I think that uh, although a lot of science does in fact rely on collaboration, the nature of cis relies on it just because there are so many different aspects to it, whether that be computational mathematics, it be some sort of physics question, or like there's some expertise in bio that's needed that a lot of people don't have. But I feel like in needing that for cisbio, ISB does a great job of just encouraging everyone to collaborate with each other because they recognize that there's so much value in getting experts from different parts of the field. Um, and they encourage all this collaboration through, talks, symposiums, town halls, bringing in like vendors and things like that for different products that we might not have considered before, but somebody else might have used. And that's a recommendation. So like things like that are really helpful to move research in a good direction. I think that, ISB really does foster an environment where it felt like it was okay to just send an email with suggestions or questions or ideas after seeing a talk. So members of labs could work with each other, like across different labs, to achieve a kind of common research goal or answer a specific question, or even just like help somebody with their own project because they might have a perspective that they didn't have. And this was even evident from things like the Innovator Awards at ISB, where basically you're allowed to work with people from across like several different fields of study and different labs just to create some technology that would help answer a question that hasn't been answered before. And that I think is really a highlight of like the collaboration that exists at ISB and like how much they actually encourage it. That these are projects that are sponsored by ISB that require you to work with other people. Um, and, I feel like the innovative research being done ultimately through all of these avenues is just really inspiring. And research at other places is inspiring, but like, I feel like at ISB, a lot of people work on projects that are inherently very difficult, and are very like will have very like small outputs, but it's super high reward in terms of like method development. And if they do get any type of like information from the research that they're doing, like it's very valuable information. Like it's very high impact. And so, a lot of institutions tend to shy away from this type of work because they're worried that the money that they put into it isn't going to pan out with the results that they get. But ISB is super dedicated to its scientists, and it's really invested in the people that it hires to work there, that they foster a system of creativity and value the innovative process just so much more than any other place that I've worked. And so I think that definitely sets ISB apart. It's really just this collaboration as well as, their value that they put in their scientists and the trust that they put in their scientists to do the great work that they can.